Hi, everyone. Nate here. Just a quick heads up that if you enjoy What a Hell of a Way to Die, you can access bonus content in which we publish a new episode every week on our Patreon. The link is in the show notes, and for $5 a month, you get access to all the bonus content we've put out since we started the show back in 2016. Hope you enjoy, and thanks for listening.
Glory, glory, what a hell of a way to die. Glory, glory, what a hell of a way to die. Glory, glory, what a hell of a way to die. He ain't gonna jump no more.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die. It is me and Nate back in the saddle again. Nate, feels like it's been a minute since I talked to you. How's Racism Island?
Oh, I mean, it's great in the sense that it's living up to its name. The new leadership of the UK Labour Party is pivoting towards being diet racism because they're convinced that they don't need minority votes or left-wing votes. They just need to appeal to Baza in Stoke-on-Trent, who is going to vote for the Tories anyway. So grim, shitty all around. The new leader of the Labour Party said it's nonsense to consider defunding the police and that Black Lives Matter is having a moment, but then it's going to pass. So yeah, well done. Well fucking done.
It's very cool how like all the political parties are just like, no, we want a leftist revolution. That's what we want. That would make us very happy to have that.
The problem in Britain is that if you get popular unrest, it's going to be a more racist version of the Gilets jaunes in France. It's going to be, you might have a kind of inchoate unrest, but there's so much disinformation and so much full-on racism that it's probably going to look like more similar to the Democratic Football Lads Alliance going around and fucking protecting the statues by pissing on them than any sort of proletarian revolution. I mean, are those people working class? Well, some of them are. By British standards, which are really difficult to pin down, even if they're making a fuckload of money and live in a low cost of living area, because of their accents and the things that they appreciate, that they are, tied to socially and culturally, they would be considered working class. Whereas apparently somebody who lives in London, who's not white, who works a minimum wage job at like Costa Coffee is a metropolitan elite. It's the stupidest shit I've ever heard in my fucking life, but people do seem to believe that here. I've made the argument before, and I'll make it again, that America has a class system and Britain has a caste system, in the sense that basically they believe that whoever your parents were or whatever you're born into, that's all you'll ever be, and it doesn't matter like what you're doing, like you can't escape it. And that to me is a little bit different than America, in which, I mean, there are obviously like class markers, and like, John Kerry and Mark Cuban are not the same. Basically, one of them has all of the, blue blood social power behind him. The other one is a billionaire who wasn't born a billionaire. But I feel like there's more parity with equivalence between a John Kerry and a Mark Cuban in terms of being like an upper class elite than in the UK, where if you're like a mega billionaire, but you're not from like Nonsington-on-Thames or whatever, and you don't have a family estate and speak with the accent that sounds like you learned English from a 300-year-old parrot, then you'll never be upper class. So it's a weird thing. I like Britain, but I also fucking hate Britain too, which I feel like is pretty. That's how most British people feel. So maybe I've integrated perfectly.
That explains a lot of British television and British books. Like just that you were born into a thing. You can't work for it. Like the entirety of Harry Potter is like, oh, he's born into this shitty existence. I guess that's just, and he's just like, no, this is fine. I guess it sucks. And it's like,
but also Harry Potter is like the most procedural lib book ever.
Sure.
I mean, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, I've never read them. I've just read summaries of them. But doesn't Voldemort die because he doesn't follow the directions?
Something like that. There's also colonial apologia.
Riley made the point years ago that the best way to describe Harry Potter and the appeal of Harry Potter is that Harry Potter posits a world in which if you do your homework every night and get perfect grades, you become the president. Like, and that to me does seem to summarize the world it creates and its bizarre contradictions and inconsistencies. But also, I was 15 when the first Harry Potter book came out. Like, I don't give a fuck about Harry Potter. I saw the first Harry Potter movie in France with my host brother, who was, 12. He wanted to watch it, so we watched it in French. And I was like, yeah, it's a pretty fun movie. I understood about half of it because it was dubbed into French, and they didn't speak French that well at the time. But it just seemed like a dumb kids movie. Like, the idea of basing your entire fucking life around it is so weird to me. And I'm an old millennial. That's the funny thing. Like, that's like the famously millennial thing that people are like, oh, they're so into their Harry Potter house or whatever. It's like, I don't know what any of that shit means.
I didn't finish the books until 2 years ago, I think. Like, I was reading them when they came out, and then I stopped after book 4 and never went further. And then so I just it's like, well, I out of no other reason other than I know I'm never going to get around to watching the movies, so I'm just going to read the books so that I can say that I have, and I can so I can properly hate them. And I do. Like, it wasn't. I no longer hate them by some sort of weird proxy. I now hate them because I have experienced them and realized how shit they are. But well, I don't want to say that they're shit. It's kids. It's for kids. If it's your politics, then it's shit. If it's just a fun book that you read because it's a fun book. I mean, I'm rereading The Stand right now, so I get that. I understand reading a dumb book because it makes you feel comfortable and you just don't want to think about other things. So, but just I'm not making The Stand my politics either.
I mean, I've read some Stephen King books not too long ago, and yeah, I mean, Stephen, like 11/22/63, that book fucking rips, man. It's a fun read. Like, Stephen King writes books that are fun reads. And on a related literary note, before we talk about what we actually want to talk about today, I always was laughing because Stephen King got some kind of lifetime achievement award from the National Book Association. And he got to give a speech at like the National Book Awards, and you can imagine all of like Stephen King as a literary author is it's a less absurd sort of concept. I mean, he writes popular horror and fiction, but there's a holdover of people from the 70s who think of him as just utter shit. Whereas people nowadays, I feel like, yeah, it's Stephen King. Like, he got like favorable reviews in the New York Times. Like, that generation of really stuck up critics has basically all retired and died. And so no one's saying that he's, breaking new ground in terms of like literary approaches, but he writes stories that pull people in, his famous sort of like career long cliches aside. And it was funny because he gave this speech and he basically was talking about like the accessibility and the immediacy of fiction. Like, authors should write books that people can relate to. And Shirley Hazard, who was an Australian author who moved to America and wrote two books that were very, very well received, 2 novels, one that won the Booker Prize and one that won the National Book Award, I believe. They were The Transit of Venus, she wrote in like 1977, and The Great Fire, she wrote in 2003. And both of them are good books, but here's the thing. Shirley Hazard was like, I don't think authors need to hear advice on fiction writing from Stephen King. And I remember laughing because I'm like, yes, Shirley, you're correct. You've written these wonderful, delicate, finely observed books that, to my knowledge, to my eyes, are perfectly fine. But you resolve the plot of The Transit of Venus on the last page by having the main character die in a plane accident. Like, I don't think I've ever seen a dumbass cliche as fucking fobbed onto the reader in a Stephen King book as I've seen, oh, what's going to happen at the end of the book? Oh, she dies in a plane crash in the last paragraph of the book. Like, to me, I was like, you must be fucking joking. So speaking of, I don't know, just the terribleness of this world, and not good books that we enjoy. My fair city is back in the news. I had like all these other notes. For the we didn't record last week because just we kept running into scheduling issues. So I have all these these notes and these links and everything that are completely useless because nobody's talking about them anymore. We're not remaining topical, so we're gonna strike while the iron is hot on St. Louis. Now, if you are a member of the Patreon, then hopefully you've listened to my interview with local activist Umar Lee. Umar is St. Louisan. He's converted to Islam when he was a teenager. He's grew up. He and I have very similar St. Louis trajectories. Except I didn't
convert to Islam, and also he's a well-known activist and protester here. And I'm going to have another St. Louis historian on to talk about to go a little bit more in depth about what we're going to talk about today. Basically, our mayor shit herself on a Facebook Live, and now everything has been cascading into these weird things where people keep paying attention to St. Louis, and I don't like it. I don't like it when you all pay attention to my city, because then it's because we like know that we're racist and backwater, even though that we're like this island of blue and a sea of red, but we're Missouri libs, like it's not the same. Like Claire McCaskill, who was our Democratic senator, famously said that, people who follow Bernie were crazy. And she also supported the border wall and was worried about this. Remember the caravan, Nate? Remember a million years ago, the caravan of immigrants?
I do indeed remember the caravan that was on Fox News every day right before the midterm elections for some reason.
Yeah, Claire McCaskill loved to talk about that as well, and she lost to an actual National Socialist, Josh Hawley, who looks like He looks like the guy who, when you do a lineup of people who have you like, has this person done a date rape? I mean, Josh Hawley looks like that. He's got a weird smile, man. I don't like it. I don't trust it. So we are going to talk a little bit about St. Louis politics because it's St. Louis, and that's what's happening right now. But if you are a member of the Patreon, we'll be going further into our mayor, Lyda Crewson, because Mark, the historian I'm going to talk to, has had run-ins with her long before she became a mayor. So, but yeah, Nate, our mayor decided. So everybody's talking about defunding the police. Defund the police means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but the idea is basically the police have too much shit. They are too eager to use their shit on the populace. We need to get them to stop using their shit. We want to dismantle them. And people have different ideas about what to do after that. But, we're in step one. So defund the police. The mayor got onto one of her lives. She does lives on a fairly regular basis from her office. And she's sitting there reading these comments about how people think that she should be doing budgeting. And so she's reading the comments, and then she's just like, oh, this person says I should give, this much to, and it's like, it's inoffensive. Like, give this amount to, budget this much to health and human services in St. Louis, budget this much to parks, budget this much to, infrastructure things, and zero to the police. And she'd be like, and that's from, and then would read the name and then the address of the people who were sending these things in. I don't know what hole appeared in her brain to make her do this, because she's never done this before. And did you watch the video, Nate? Did you watch my mayor do this?
I haven't watched the whole video, but I have seen clips of it. I've definitely seen the gist of it, that she effectively doxes these people by reading the other addresses out, and it's like,
and the fucking
seems like
the stink that she had on her voice while reading those names, and such Karen energy, man. Like it was incredible to see her just be like, this fucking bitch who lives here talking shit on me. So that has caused an uproar. And, Nate, if I were the mayor of St. Louis, I would look into how does St. Louis react to shit. Because the way we react to shit is we start throwing rocks and shit. We protest. That's just what St. Louis does. We fucking love to protest, man. We're a French city. What do you think we do other than get mad and protest about shit? So we have our protests. We have people going to the mayor's house. The mayor, of course, lives in a gated community on private roads and private houses, and in this little chunk of this little bit of St. Louis that is for the, and I put quotes on the rich, because what's rich in St. Louis is not necessarily rich in New York City. But they start walking through. They go through these gates into this gated community, and then we have our next big St. Louis story, which are two lawyers with guns, who decided to wave them around at people. And Nate, I gotta say, like, there's never been more compelling of an argument to me that people shouldn't have guns than this couple. Like, I can't. First off, what was the guy carrying? Like, did he somehow?
He was carrying what I believe is a custom or stock model you can get from a gun maker. I don't know the name. I saw some people mentioning the names, but it's an AR-15 variant that is designed to resemble the early versions of the M16. So like,
it's a
M16A1, but
it's a Cold War M16A2. Like, it's got the carrying handle on it and no fucking optics. Like that.
Yeah, when I was in the cadet camp for ROTC, we had to use really, really old M16s that had been handed down. The one I had was literally an XM16 because it was one of the testing models from before they fielded it to the whole army. But the only difference looking at that weapon in terms of like the styling was that they eventually got rid of the XM16 had a like smooth, like triangle shaped heat shield. So it didn't have like the ribbed heat shield that you see on that the M16A2s. And obviously, if he's buying this, it's not going to be full auto, so it's just going to be a single shot. But it's styled to look like an M16A2, so like a pre-Global War on Terror, pre like Cold War era / Gulf War era M16A2. So it literally looks like the gun from Scarface.
Right, the gun from Scarface was a 203, so it had a grenade launcher on the bottom. But
oh shit, I forgot about that. I haven't seen that movie since before I joined the army, so I'm like, it's a big gun. I had no idea what I was looking at.
And literally, the fact that it's a 203 is the only thing I remember from Scarface and the big pile of cocaine. I remember nothing else from that movie. So yeah, we've got old boy here with what looks like a surplus rifle that was handed down. Somebody's just like, it fell off the back of the truck, but it's such a shitty rifle that nobody's like, it's fine. We've got plenty of other shitty rifles. And then we've got his wife with her little, I don't know what the fuck that was, a little 22 Walther or something, out there just waving guns, holding guns weird, yelling at the protesters, just all manner of insanity. And there is just something to this that, like, this and then the discourse that pops up around it. Because of course, you can't have two crazy people with a gun without having other people say, well, they were perfectly within their right. They should have been doing this shit. That it's fine that they're out here being batshit insane. It's not okay to do that. It's not okay because we can see that there was absolutely no training that they had, no safety precautions that they were taking. There is nothing that they were doing that made me think that these people should or deserve or need to own a gun. They're just a couple of rich assholes who were having dinner outside, and then they heard people come into the gate being smashed, which means opened, and people walked through. They went inside, they got their guns, and then they came back outside. I mean, even from a tactical standpoint, none of that fucking makes any sense to me. But nothing matters anymore. It just doesn't fucking matter anymore. Because these people, they're rich. One, they're St. Louis rich, so nothing's going to happen to them. But two, legally, they didn't do anything wrong. And I think that makes us have to rethink our laws at this point. Because that is, of course, that is the big argument right now, right? Is, well, legally, those protesters were on private property. Well, legally, these streets are private. Well, legally, it's okay for them to do this. I mean, okay, but that's still pretty fucked up. I don't know, man. Their lawyer says that they support Black Lives Matter. What they were concerned about, the guy was just saying like, oh, it was like the storming of the Bastille of these people. And you watch the videos, and it's just people coming through and they're chanting their protest stuff, and they're walking along to go to the mayor's house. But his reaction was just like, oh, we were scared that our house was going to get looted and burned and our pets killed and this, that, and the other thing. Like, and there's this like, we support Black Lives Matter. And it's such a NIMBY like response. It's such as like, we support Black Lives Matter over there, but don't bring it in here. like to say it's like, oh, we thought we were being stormed. It was a Bastille storming, and then to go out and point your guns at the protesters who were walking by, like absolutely insane. But my mayor, who lives in that area, who didn't apologize for doxing people until like it became very obvious that it was a problem. She even had an interview where she was like, no, I didn't do anything wrong. It's perfectly fine. Those names are public record. There's nothing wrong with what I did. Eventually, she had to come out and be like, whoops, sorry, I fucked up. Because she doxed a minor, too. Let's not forget, one of the names and addresses she gave out was a 13-year-old. But, we have these people in this area who are very much Joe Biden Democrats, where I'm sure that they say, yes, they don't like Donald Trump. They loved Obama, and they loved they love Biden, they love Clinton. And I got to tell you, man, I don't trust a Democrat that lives in a private neighborhood, a private residence, like this, a place where the streets are private. To say you can't come here because you don't have the money to be here is not what I would say should be the trait of the political party that is supposed to represent me, who doesn't live in a gate. I mean, I know I'm privileged to own a house. I don't have a gated community. I don't want a gated community, though, either. I like the people in my neighborhood, but
I don't want to live in a gated community either. I mean, we live on a cul-de-sac, and that alone makes it weird and insular. I can only imagine if there was actually a security apparatus preventing people from coming in here, how paranoid people would get. I mean, it's weird, man. I think I've only been to St. Louis once. I went there for my friend's wedding, and I was there for a couple of days. At the time I was living in New York. I had just finished the first year of grad school, and so obviously my comparisons of St. Louis were, with New York was a little weird because it's just a very different city. I remember getting up in the morning one time from the hotel, and it was like, let's go. I was like, getting a little hungover. We'd been out the night before. I'm like, fuck it, I'm gonna go see if we can find some breakfast. And there's like nothing open. And I was walking down the street in what I think was downtown St. Louis. I'm not sure, but it was closer to WashU and the like some of the big parks. Anyway, everyone who I saw on the street, and I saw like 3 people, they all like said good morning to me, which just as a New Yorker weirded me out. But the point I'm trying to get to with this is that I remember driving to and from places because we went to a Cardinals game. We went to like some old, like really, really hole in the wall, kind of like family restaurant and bar, kind of close to the Cardinals stadium. But then taking cabs or whatever to and from places back to the hotel, what really struck me was like there are hard demarcated segregation lines in St. Louis. And there's also this random stretch like near WashU and near some of the parks where it's just every house looks like some kind of ridiculous antebellum slavery mansion, like big marble columns and shit. And it just struck me that this city, the big takeaway I have as an outsider was that listening to the bonus episode that we're going to link to with Umar Lee, like, the extent to which the city was like hard segregated for so long, you can absolutely see it. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but Florissant, not the town, but rather like there's a like Florissant Road or Boulevard or something like that. Am I crazy? It feels like when you cross Florissant, it immediately changes. It goes from being like,
it's not. We have a couple streets like that. The main one is called the Delmar Divide.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Delmar, we have an area called the Loop, which is where a lot of trendy restaurants and everything are. But the further down Delmar you go, like, and it's wild too because, like, as you said, there are gated communities that bump up to Delmar, and then as soon as you cross Delmar, which is like it's a big street, it's a very busy street, but as soon as you cross Delmar, your median income drops by $50,000 a year. Like immediately, it's this, and yeah, it is street to street in St. Louis, segregation, and that's built in. A lot of it is built into St. Louis. Highway 55 was created and cut through and was meant specifically to divide the city, to divide black and white neighborhoods by running a massive interstate through them, and then you got your white flight. You've got St. Louis is a very racist town. and it is very like people from the outside, if they come to St. Louis and they actually go around to a lot of the areas in St. Louis, have the exact same response that you do. They're just like, it's weird. We were just in a very nice neighborhood. What happened? It's like, oh, we crossed over this imaginary line that just means that now we're in a bad neighborhood, and there's nothing else to it, man. That's all it is.
One of the things that surprised me was like going for my friend's wedding. They had their reception at his wife's house, or her parents' house, which was in a suburb in St. Louis. I can't remember what the town name was, but what I do recall was, to get there, we had to basically take like a bus, like a school bus that they had, painted, and it was like a thing you could commission for party travel. And going on the interstate or the highway, whatever it was, to get to this, like you see all the signs for these places like Ferguson and Country Club Hills and stuff like that. And then I remembered, I was like, it seems so weird that there's so many towns in such a small area. And then I remember people talking, because it was, the year prior the Ferguson protest had happened, that like a lot of that was basically that towns were allowed to incorporate and sort of declare themselves separate entities from the city of St. Louis. And these were literally like subdivisions, but they were doing that so that they basically could enforce housing covenants and discriminate and stay segregated and stuff like that. And so it felt to me like you have like 50 little constituent nations of these tiny, small, different towns that have incorporated in St. Louis County.
90. We have 90.
You're kidding. Holy. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's so, like, don't get me wrong. Indianapolis has a similar thing that when Marion County and the city of Indianapolis merged their governments to be like one local authority, that meant a lot of townships in Marion County that had basically operated separately from the city of Indianapolis now fell under the purview of Indianapolis, which meant Indianapolis public schools, which meant things like in the 70s they were doing busing and stuff like that. And so there was a huge amount of white flight to basically outside the boundaries of Marion County. And so where I'm from, Carmel, is basically the county line is 96th Street. So if you're going north on Meridian or on a Keystone from Indianapolis, you cross 96th Street, all of a sudden you're in a different city. And that was like the red line. That was the hard line. That Carmel was segregated and Indianapolis was in the process of integrating. But you don't have a similar thing to St. Louis with what you're describing with like 90 different town authorities, because basically they kind of merged all of the local governance into Marion County. There's this thing called Unigov. And so you now, like, in a way, I wonder if what happened in St. Louis would have otherwise happened in Indianapolis if like the local politics like had the majority to do it.
Dude, if I could go on about how the insanity of these tiny municipalities, because a lot of them also have their own governments, their own police departments.
Own police forces. I remember hearing the stories about like, them doing bullshit charges on people for speeding tickets and harassing them and then like arresting them on unpaid fines, because the way they fund their entire local government is just bullshit charges.
Yeah, there's a place called Calverton Park that is a small postage stamp size, but man, don't do more than don't do more than 2 miles over the speed limit, because you'll get popped and you'll get a speeding ticket for the maximum amount and there's no fighting that in court. Like, you can get a lawyer. And maybe you can get charges reduced, but no, it's absolutely insane. So, and a lot of those 90 municipalities, a lot of them are very small. They don't have their own police departments. North County, there is like a North County collective police department that patrols multiple small, like Pine Lawn and a few places like that. But no, it's absolutely insane. And every time we talk about like, hey, we need to merge everybody back together, this is nuts, because it's like they're all separate governments, but also they get their water, their sewer, their trash. It's all St. Louis City owned and everything. People in St. Louis City have to pay more taxes than the people in the county. So it's better, quote, to live in the county because you're not that far from the city and you can still use all the city amenities. It's a whole thing. And Lyda Crewson, our mayor. See, we used to have a mayor, Francis Slay. He was fine. He was Syrian American, and he was mayor for, I think, 3 or 4 terms. He was fine. He never made waves. He improved things in South City, not so much in North City. But man, Lyda is just, And Mark and I on the bonus episode will get into the abject racism of how she got elected, because there's a whole thing there. And we have our local black newspaper, the St. Louis American, kind of calls our city treasurer Tashara Jones, calls her the shadow mayor, because a lot of people believe she should have taken the mayorship. But there's just it's so insane, and like our insanity gets put out there like this. Like, I mean, like you said, Ferguson, dude. Ferguson, people found out just how fucked up St. Louis is, and you would think at some point in time that St. Louis would be like, wow, we're really fucked up, we should change some things. And we didn't. Ferguson just elected their first black mayor, like the very first, in a municipality that is mostly black Americans. They just elected a black woman mayor. So that's a nice little, step in the right direction. But Jesus Christ, like nothing else has gotten better. And then we see this, and then we see, the insanity that is just St. Louis. This is Fox News brain or MSNBC brain. I don't know, because these two say that they support Black Lives Matter, but and that they're huge Democrats. But what the fuck does that even mean? Like, as soon as you're inconvenienced, you become a Republican. You go grab your gun.
You pull out a gun and you start going fucking crazy. I mean, they're Democrats in the sense that Claire McCaskill's a Democrat, which is to say 20 years ago they would have been Republicans. But, they're not quite blood and soil, full bore, deport them all racists. But they support the sort of blue dog Republican or blue dog Democrat shit. And who knows? Maybe this will force an awakening. I doubt it, though, because like the thing about it is that the pressure and scrutiny will eventually fade, and they'll still live in this big fuck off mansion in St. Louis in a gated community, in a city that, to my eyes, having been there, seemed as though it's the entirety of its physical geography and concept of an urban community was built solely in service of racism and segregation.
100%. Like that is. This is we call you Racism Island. We call England Racism Island, but absolutely St. Louis has no has no leg to stand on with that one, because we are the racism municipality, I suppose. It sucks.
Yeah, Britain is Racism Island, don't get me wrong, and Britain, founded America, and America got more brutal and more aggressive because it made money that way. But the fact of it is, Britain, the attitudes that people have here and the sheer unwillingness to confront the reality for people. Like, I think the biggest thing is that, have you ever heard of a woman named Jane Elliott?
Name sounds familiar.
You may have seen videos of her on Twitter. She's a anti-racist educator. She's an old white woman, and she has like very white hair. She wears close cropped, and she has glasses. You may have seen the class where she basically like does the experiment where, people with blue eyes versus people with brown eyes, and the people with brown eyes get discriminated against and harassed, and people with blue eyes, or vice versa. I can't remember. And it's a thing that she's done in America a lot of times. And, oftentimes people, you'll see videos of white people losing their minds and freaking out at the experiment. And, oftentimes there's also people in the room who are black or who are Hispanic or who are, perceived as not white. And they'll just be like, y'all are losing your minds because you're experiencing what we've been experiencing literally since our first childhood memories. She tried that same experiment in the UK, like in like a BBC thing, and it completely failed because every single white person in the room was like, no, that's bullshit. Racism isn't real. Like, no, I don't think this is discrimination at all. And they just dogpiled over and over again. And even though there was a black person in the audience, they just completely dogpiled them and wouldn't acknowledge anything they said. My experience in Britain is that you have a societal attitude that's incredibly, incredibly racist and just dismissive of the idea that black people and Muslim people and non-white people in general, people of color in general, they are dismissive of their opinions in the sense that anything they describe from their own personal experience gets hand-waved as like, oh, that person's just oversensitive, like they must be making it up. The thing about it is, it's different about Britain versus the United States is that you don't have as much of the physical infrastructure of racism in terms of the way cities are built, the way housing is allocated, that kind of stuff, because they haven't had as much time to do it as America. Don't get me wrong, in 100 years, I mean, based on my read of British people, they absolutely will. They absolutely do it already. They're working on it with regard to like housing in major cities. But the difference here, I feel like when you talk about what you're describing in St. Louis, is that Britain offshored all of its racism for the longest time. You think about it, like they didn't have slavery in Britain. They just reaped all the profits of slavery. They didn't have a subjugated black population living in Britain, working for nothing, being owned as property. They just had the money that came from all of that. And so there's just the way in which society accommodated itself to it is different. But I honestly think in terms of attitudes, I think white British people are like 50 years behind even white American people, which is fucking saying something, man. Like, because God knows America sucks. But I'm telling you, it's weird seeing it as an American. And I don't really have a lot of hope for this country. I just feel terrible because, black British people are cool as shit and they are like the backbone of the economy in this country. Like, they do the jobs, they're out doing the work. Like, they're the people who have kept the state afloat, working in things like the NHS, working in public transit, working in the education system, working in the social care sector. You know what I mean? Like, these are people who do the jobs that matter in communities, even if they don't get fuck off banking salaries. And my God, like, the attitudes are so fucking toxic here. So anyway, I'm saying that because I feel like there is a tendency for people to look at stuff like St. Louis in America and cities that, were formerly segregated, officially segregated, and are still de facto segregated. And you say like, oh, America is so fucked up. Wow, it's so bad. It's awful. And it's like, I'm telling you, those attitudes aren't any different. And if you could go back and build new cities in this country, you'd absolutely do the same fucking thing.
Yep.
That's the thing.
There'd just be more space age racism instead of old-timey racism.
Yeah, exactly. And until you can confront that, until you can fight that, until you can get over your discomfort of calling out other people, and not on fucking line, but like the people in your life, the people you encounter at work. And obviously that's a challenging thing too, because you'll get dogpiled too. Until that happens, like, I don't think that you're going to find you when you build a systemic racist system, the system reproduces the outcomes no matter who's in charge. And until you confront that system, you're just going to see the same outcomes. So to me, I feel like it's kind of saddening to hear what you just said, that St. Louis and Ferguson, but even just the towns all around St. Louis, like, despite having been in the national spotlight, like, shit hasn't really gotten any better. And my God, dude, I hope that people piggyback off this stuff with the mayor doxing people to just fucking do some work. But I don't know. You're the one who's there. What do you think's going to happen?
I mean, St. Louis, as I said, St. Louis loves to protest. There's multiple ways to remove the mayor. She has already said that she won't resign, I believe, and she doesn't feel like she did anything wrong, which is the biggest problem. There's no just like, can't you see what you did is dangerous and stupid and incredibly like insane. And, you're explaining that to a person who lives on a private road. So no, you're not. That person's never going to understand it. I think her son also is like a person that got a local public school closed so that he could build a charter school there. So, I mean, that's the kind of Democrats we're talking about. We're talking about people who don't really have any shame for you to try to pull on their like no, you should feel bad about this thing and you should, do things to make up for it. Because she's like, no, she doesn't feel bad about it. And I think one of the best things I saw was the editor, I guess the person who made the Riverfront Times, which is our biggest like alt newspaper, said that what she should do is like, don't resign, just do your last 10 months, close the workhouse, which is this. And Mark and I will go into the workhouse on our show. Close the workhouse, and there's just like a couple of other things, and these small things that you can do that will overshadow this massive fuck up that you did. Oh, kill airport privatization. Because Jesus Christ, they're still trying to push that through. No matter how many times we say that we don't want to privatize the airport, they're still going to try to push it through because somebody's going to make money off of it. Um, you know, there are these things that can come through and make you look better. Like for me, if I fucked up so hard like this, I would want to bury my head certainly, but she has outs. She has ways to deal with this. But again, she doesn't feel like she did anything wrong. She has her she's being pulled by, I'm sure, Rex Sinkfield, I think it is, who's like a Missouri billionaire Republican who, helps who does things to make, his dragon hoard pile of gold doubloons bigger at the expense of, your average Missourian. So it's all, it's all insane. We have a couple of options. I think the Board of Aldermen are looking into removing the mayor. I'm not sure though. I don't think all of them are behind it. I really feel like we're stuck with Cruson until she retires on her own, just like we were with Slay. Because this is a town that's always going to vote for a Democratic mayor. Now we do see, you've seen out there a lot of really good and strong primaries. Notably in Kentucky, Amy McGrath versus this Booker gentleman. We're still waiting on everything to come in for that. McGrath may still win, but by, just really the skin of her teeth. So maybe hopefully there's somebody out there who can primary Lyda Cruson. Maybe we can get a decent mayor that gives a fuck, but like, I don't know, man. We haven't in the past really, so I don't know why we would in the future. So it does have that, I a long time ago I made the, after Sanders lost the primary the second time, I was like, man, I want to focus more on local politics. I want to be more involved on my local scene, and then just like even the local politics seems insurmountable. That's like the most grating part of this is that. Even locally, my shitty little town of 300,000 people, even that seems like, an uphill fight constantly. And so it's a fight that I'm starting to learn, and it's a fight that I'm starting to get more and more involved in because it's an important fight. But like, I gotta hand. That's why I liked having Umar on. That's why I'm gonna like having Mark on, and maybe get a couple of other local people, for some bonus episodes, because like there's a lot of hard work that these people have been doing. So and I think that those things need to be spotlit, and locally in your own cities, I'm sure those things are happening too. There's an Umar Lee in every city. There's there are people who are doing this work, because even your local politics is insurmountable, but you're gonna fucking push that rock up the hill regardless. Because maybe you will get it up to the top. Who fucking knows? One of these days.
Yeah, man. Well, in that regard, I feel like we should roll the footage of your interview with Umar. I'm going to try to do a little bit of a longer clip here so folks can hear this, because I think he's got a lot of really interesting stuff to say, and the man's like a walking encyclopedia of St. Louis history. So if this sounds interesting to you, you can get it on the Patreon. I will link to the episode in the show notes.
And I mean, look, I'd be all for blowing up the bridges between St. Louis County and St. Charles. Like, if they want to be on their own, that's fine by me. I don't want them here either. I don't want them coming in bitching and moaning, because a big reason for a lot of stolen guns on the streets of St. Louis is because those dipshits come in to town,
right,
and they have their piece in their in their car, and then they don't lock the car because they're going to a Cardinals game,
right,
and then their shit gets broken into and stolen. So
well, St. Charles County, you should go back in history in the Post-Dispatch archives when they had the hearings on bringing the Metrolink out to St. Charles County. And it was some hilarious shit, man. I mean, they were talking about they're going to burglarize us, and, like bring couches on the Metrolink and our televisions. I mean, it was hilarious, but we saw it just a few years ago, too, when the Normandy School District, they started sending kids out to Francis Howell in St. Charles County. Actually, This American Life on NPR did a good program on that. And they went nuts. They had a town hall meeting attended by thousands. So like, yo, we don't want these black kids from Normandy Normandy School District out here in St. Charles County. And the funny thing is that they may not want it or not, but there actually is a growing black population in St. Charles County as well. So I don't know what they're going to do next. Move to Knob Noster, Missouri, or I don't know what they're going to do.
You're gonna go south to Herculaneum or something, but yeah, I mean, there's all these places, as black people in St. Louis and in some other cities start to do better financially, they're gonna say, hey, I want to live out here where it's quiet and it's suburban. Like I live in St. Louis City, and it's nothing to hear gunshots around here. So
right.
I assume anybody who has money and it's like I can afford $300,000 of suburbia out in St. Charles, they're gonna go and buy that. And there's absolutely nothing. That's the thing I don't get. Like, if you're surrounded by houses that cost $250,000 or $500,000, you gotta feel like, well, if anybody comes out here and lives here, regardless of the color of their skin, they are probably in the same class spectrum as me. So it shouldn't be a problem. It's like I'm not inviting you all to move to the city. I don't want them, and I don't want my city to have these St. Charles people coming back into it. Personally, I don't know. Sometimes I don't know if I'm a gentrifier or not, but I mean, I've been in the city for like 15 years now. But I guess St. Louis City is really at least South City. It's very mixed anyway. So
yeah,
there isn't gentrification is really just on the north side, kind of.
A couple of South Side neighborhoods, Shaw, Tower Grove, those neighborhoods, but
anything around Cherokee, any of the streets branching off of Cherokee
Street. Right. The smell of patchouli from a couple blocks away. You're near to Cherokee Street. But yeah, I mean, look, this Saturday we got our rally at 11 at the King Louis IX statue, and then these alt-right figures have announced a rally for noon. So we'll meet each other. We'll see each other. I'm sure they'll be very cordial and friendly, and we'll be very cordial and friendly. It should make for a very interesting Saturday, because what we have not seen in St. Louis during these waves of protest is any face-to-face contact with Trump supporters and white nationalists and the alt-right. But our rally is at 11. We're going to have a lot of activists out, and their rally at noon is being organized by the founder of the Tea Party, Bill Hennessy, and Jim Hoft of the Gateway Pundit, who's one of the most prominent white nationalists in the media sphere. So the alt-right's coming out, and we're coming out, and we'll see what happens.
Umar, do you remember back in like 2003, 2004, when we were ramping up to go to war with Iraq?
Yes.
And the international community was just kind of like, we don't want any part of this. Like, especially the French. The French are like, we're not going to, look, we'll be with you in Afghanistan, but we're not doing this shit. Right. And then there was all the Bill O'Reilly doing pour out your champagne and call them freedom fries. And, and like, did you ever think that you would see a bunch of people like come around? Like, Catholics, I understand being monarchists, but but I don't understand, a bunch of alt-rights, libertarian, right-leaning people to be like, no, we love our French king that has been dead for, hundreds of years. We protect him.
You got to see how they spin it. So their spin on it is, I mean, obviously during the Iraq war, they were like, the French are a bunch of pussies. We bailed them out a few times, and, we're going to eat our freedom fries and our freedom toast and all that shit. But they recouch it, because if you look at like their kind of theorists, they say that the French were corrupted by the French Revolution, and that pre-revolution French was a glorious Catholic kingdom, and no one represented that more than Louis IX, who is the only the only French king sainted by the Catholic Church, who led a crusade twice, failed both times. But I got one of these people trolling me. It's like, Omar Ali's just mad because King Louis kicked the Muslims out of Jerusalem. King Louis IX never made it to Jerusalem because he was defeated both times. So like, I don't know where these people are getting their history at, but so they look at that as a glory era of France, $700-800 ago, and that we are now in a period of French decadence, where you can go to France and they don't want to make war, they don't want to burn people at the stake and boil them, and they don't want to burn Jews, and they just now they just want to drink and be merry and be decadent, and it's racially mixed. So they hate the modern France, but and certainly the modern France does have some problems, but they love the medieval France.
Right. They love that idea, and there's never any question of like, if there's a revolution like where the common man starts to build complex structures with the sole purpose of cutting your head off, like they're not even going to be like, hey, let's just get a big sword. They're like, no, we need to build something because we want you to know that we're serious about this shit.
Right.
The French guillotines, and nobody's like, I wonder what they did to like make an entire populace rise up against them. It must have been, it must have been the population's fault or something.
The guillotine.
And then of course you have France now, and this is why I fucking love the French too, because the French now like will riot if you threaten to cut their like second cigarette baguette break. They got no problem with fucking your shit up, and good. Like they have a solidarity that like America will never know or understand.
Yeah, the French riot all the time. I love it. So I wish we could get that spirit out here. But I think that, look, historically in protest, Americans are kind of scared, right? They're scared to really press the issue beyond what's legal. And you're seeing that change with this new wave of protests, where people are doing stuff that, would have been unimaginable, even, during the Ferguson uprising. So that's changing. Hopefully we're becoming more like France in that way. Not the way in their anti-immigrant sentiment over there, their anti-Muslim sentiment, but in the sense that we will take to the streets, when it's necessary. But back to the guillotine. Now, think about the guillotine is, what I can never understand is, ISIS and all these groups, they cut a lot of heads off. And I know they're not big on innovation. They don't like innovation. That's part of their philosophy. But it seems like the guillotine was a great innovation for beheading. You know what I'm trying to say?
I think people like it because it's theatrical. Like there's a reveal, there's a big blade. Like again, like you can execute somebody with, an AK-47 round costs 50 cents.
For sure.
So you can do an execution, but like, ISIS videos, if you watch the ISIS beheading propaganda videos, there's a lot of theater to it. And
right.
I think that's the guillotine is part of that. It's like it's a celebration. We're all going to get together and behead some nobles with our giant noble beheading machine that we built.
Like I got a thick neck. I have a very thick neck. And like,
sure.
I don't think I could.
Look, that guillotine was not always a clean cut. That's one thing they don't tell you about when discussing the French Revolution.
Because I've always thought if like some ISIS dude wanted to take my head off, it'd take 2 or 3 swings of the sword. Like you have to be a really strong guy to get it off with one whack.
Mm-hmm.
So
and it's got to be sharp. Like, and that they're not taking care of they're not taking care of their sharpening their shit out there.
So it'd be a tough job. So
right,
we're gonna really have to.
Yeah, Umar, you said you brought up the Ferguson uprising, and I definitely want to talk about that too because you were a big part of that as well.
Yes.
That was 6 years ago, right? So 2014.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So what are the the differences that you're seeing between the Ferguson uprising in 2014 and protests, and I'm specifically meaning St. Louis, but also we can kind of talk about it in general terms as well, because I know you're on the ground in St. Louis, so that's where you're kind of seeing things. So, other than that, there's kind of a bigger groundswell now. What are some of the differences that you're seeing between Ferguson 2014 and Ferguson, Florissant, St. Louis in general 2020?
There's a few big ones. One, as you mentioned, that it's just so much more widespread. We could never get all these communities to come out in Ferguson Now you have protests all throughout the St. Louis metropolitan area, including in very white areas. You're having Bosnians for Black Lives, Muslims for Black Lives, Latinos for Black Lives, all these
Webster Groves for Black Lives.
Webster Groves. Jefferson County had one in Festus.
Yeah.
St. Charles County had a big one. They had several big ones actually out in St. Charles County. And so we can never get it to spread like that. So just the sheer size and the numbers of protests, that's a big difference. The second thing is the activity which will happen, and some people will get aggressive and stuff like that. Just this round is just a lot more aggressive. Ferguson got hot and heavy on a few nights. Definitely August 10th, August 11th of 2014 was very hot and heavy out in the streets of Ferguson. The day the non-indictment was announced in November on that Thanksgiving weekend was hot and heavy. But most nights were just a standoff between police and protesters. But you have seen continued street action, which has, went into civil disobedience and taking down the monuments and, pressing the issue with police over the span of weeks since the killing of George Floyd. Lastly, the police response has been much different. The police came out like rock and sock and robots in Ferguson, were very aggressive, beating protesters, gassing protesters, arresting people, clearing streets. And a lot of times, like, for example, the Florissant PD is very hands-off. They're very hands-off, and, there's been a handful of arrests in recent days, but that's not even been the Florissant police. It's other people coming there working secondary. But the police have a lot less of aggressive posture this go around. And a lot of that's because they just got hit with so many lawsuits. I got $19,000 from the city of Ferguson in a lawsuit, for wrongful arrest. And so police departments are a lot more timid this time around because of that.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. Happy 4th of July to all of you. I guess when this will come out, you'll have the weekend. Please keep your fingers and toes and everything safe. Don't blow them off. If you're going to shoot bottle rockets, make sure don't do that thing where your drunk uncle did it, where he holds the bottle rocket in his hand and then throws it. Because, that's just going to be a trip to the emergency room. So make sure that, 1, you're not doing dumb shit, but 2, read up on a little basic first aid on what to do when somebody in your fireworks collective does do some dumb shit. You can patch them up, put their fingers on ice, maybe get them sewn back on, maybe not, and then you get to call them Stumpy for the rest of their life. It's one of those things where it's funny, later on down the road, not necessarily funny when it happens. So, you can follow me at Army Strength, follow Nate at In These Deserts, follow the podcast. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, we're on Twitter. We are everywhere. We've got writings. I've been doing more writing. By the time this episode comes out, there should be something new up on hellovawaytodie.com, as well as new things in the store. So, everybody, thank you so much for being Patreons, for being listeners, for everything that you do for us, for yourselves, and for those around you. And Nate, we'll talk to you next week.
Yep, take care.